Hey everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we are going to start on Chapter 17 of the Absorbent Mind, which is titled Further Elaborations on Culture and Imagination. So I spent several months thinking about Chapter 17 and how I wanted to approach this video. And that's partly because it is one of the bigger chapters in this book. I knew this was going to be a very long video just because of the length of the chapter, but I also had a hard time deciding on how to approach the main themes in this chapter. As I started putting everything together, I decided to take a different approach to this Absorbent Mind video than my previous ones. Instead of going through the chapter in a linear order, I decided to explain this chapter thematically. So we're going to jump around a bit with the page numbers, and I'm doing this mainly so we can explore each thematic thread as a whole instead of breaking it down into little pieces here and there, as Montessori does in the chapter itself. As I read this chapter, I decided to classify her main points into 4 categories. The first part is what we'll be discussing today, which is the introduction. And then in the next video, we will talk about one of my favorite Montessori subjects, which is imagination. After that, we will focus on the 4 main areas of the primary classroom, which is language, practical life, sensorial, and math. And then we will end this series on Chapter 17 discussing culture and social groups. Now, because the section on language is extremely long, I also had to divide the topic of the 4 main areas of the primary classroom into 2 videos. So language and practical life will be one video, and then sensorial and math will be the second video in this category. So in total, I will be dividing Chapter 17 into 5 video segments, which I will release individually. I will also release a 6th video where I combine all 5 of the videos into one, just in case some people want one cohesive video instead of 5 separate segments. And when I do that, I will make sure to put in chapter markers for each section for easier navigation of the subjects. So that's the basics of how we are going to journey through Chapter 17. It's a big chapter with a lot of great information in it, and I won't go over everything Montessori has to say, but I hope that this overview will help you have a better understanding of the Montessori method. I do encourage you to pick up the book and read over the parts I left out so that you can have the full impression of her work. A lot of what I'm leaving out is still very important because it often covers her personal stories and observations from the children that she worked with. Before you pick up the book for yourself, I want to go over an important piece of terminology that appears several times in this particular chapter. Montessori uses the analogy of the weaver's warp several times in this chapter, and when she talks about that, what she's referring to is this vertical thread on a loom. For example, on page 162 she says, "In the learning of language, it is like the weaver's warp that is placed first on the loom, not the cloth that is going to be woven, but the basis for it. This warp corresponds to the sounds of words, with their rhythms and vocal cadences, and the order of their arrangement in grammatical form. So it is with these exercises of practical life that the warp of general behavior is laid down for a particular nation or race." So that's just an example of what she's talking about when she's talking about the weaver's warp. And as we go through this chapter, I just want to make you aware of this so you have a better idea of what it is she's talking about. With that being said, let's begin this first video, which is going to be about the introduction to Chapter 17. Now that we have our framework in place for Chapter 17, let's begin on page 153. Montessori begins the chapter talking about the laws of nature. She says, "Children of this age are urged by the laws of their nature to find active experiences in the world about them. For this they use their hands, and not only for practical purposes, but also for acquiring knowledge. If we leave children free in this new kind of environment that we have provided, they give us quite an unexpected impression of their nature and abilities. They seem to be happier, and they have such deep interests that they can work for long periods of time without fatigue. As a result, their minds seem to open out, and they become eager for knowledge." So before we go further, I have a few questions, and this is just for your personal reflection. My first question is, do you think how children use their hands will determine what knowledge they acquire? We know that Montessori placed a lot of importance on how children use their hands and that does help them acquire knowledge. But what are we seeing nowadays? What active experiences are children having in the world in this modern era? Based on the idea that children use their hands in active experiences to learn, what are you seeing in the modern child's experiences and development? How is the modern child acquiring knowledge? What are you seeing going on with their hands? What are you seeing going on with their real experiences with the world? Are the children in our environments left free to explore, or are they dictated to constantly by an adult? Are the activities exploratory and purposeful, or are they simply busy work? Are the lessons presented in a way where the adult is the focus of the lessons, or is the child focused on the materials and the acquisition of skills? Have we provided an environment that allows freedom of movement and choice, or have we provided an environment of restrictions? So these are just some questions I have for you. These are just questions for you to reflect on, and if you want to get a journal and reflect on some of these questions or have a discussion about this with your coworkers, that's just for you. I'm not going to answer these questions for you, but I thought I'd ask them and see how you feel about it and what are your responses to this. And if you have some strong feelings about this, go ahead and comment down in the comment section below, because I would love to hear from you. Next, Montessori is going to talk about providing conditions of real life, and this is on page 153 as well. She says, "It was this that lay behind the explosion into writing, the occurrence which first drew widespread attention to this unknown mental life of little children. But the explosion into writing was really nothing but smoke from the fire. The real explosion takes place within the inner personality. Outwardly, they seem solid and unchangeable. But one day there is a bang, and flames come bursting out through the mass of rock. Directly, these children found themselves under conditions of real life, with serious implements for their own use, of a size proportionate to theirs. Unexpected activities seemed to awaken within them. These were as unmistakable as they were surprising, and it was our effort to follow them and interpret their meaning, helping others like them to appear also, that brought this method of education into being." So here's just a few more questions I have for you. And my first question is, what are these conditions of real life that she is referring to? If you have experience in Montessori, you might already have a list in your head that you're going through. But if you are not experienced with Montessori, what we're really talking about here is real work and real materials. The materials we are using in the classroom are fragile. They're breakable, they're beautiful, there are real consequences to the materials that we are using in our environments. For instance, in the primary classroom with 3 to 6-year-olds, we use glass. This means that things break. If you've noticed, in society, we use a lot of plastic. We have sippy cups that don't spill and don't break, and that's what we usually give children to work with, to have with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, when it comes to learning some skills and learning consequences of behavior, they don't really help with that. So we do want to provide an environment where we're giving children things that are fragile, that are breakable. We need them to practice with those things, because it is in those experiences that those children really experience consequence. What if I'm not careful? What happens? This is a control of error. How do I move through the classroom without bumping and breaking things? And it goes further than that. When a child is given something that's beautiful and breakable, there's something that happens inside of them. There is this new caution, new wonder, new amazement, and there's a feeling of trust and privilege. Like, I am privileged that I get to have something so beautiful in my environment, that I get to take care of something this special. And we really want children to feel that. We don't want them to feel like, I can throw this sippy cup across the room and it doesn't really mean anything, right? I don't have any consequences for that behavior. We don't want to fill their world with things that don't have consequence. And so when we're talking about real work and real materials, we want children not to pretend to do something, but to actually do it. We don't want them to pretend to make food, but to actually make food. And maybe that goes as simple as putting butter on crackers or chopping a pickle. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. But the purpose is that it is real. And through that real work, they develop concentration. They have more interest in that. Maria Montessori says that the pretend play and the toys no longer appealed to the children when they gave them real work that they could do, when they gave them the choice. In Maria Montessori's original environment, she did provide toys. She did provide things that would allow for pretend play, because that is always what we had done before. That was common, that was traditional. But she started to put things in the classroom that were real activities. The children could actually sweep, they could actually sew, they could actually polish. They could do all these real works. But everything was appropriate for the age and the size of the child. This condition of real life was freedom. It allowed children to choose because everything in the environment is set up to be good for them and appropriate for them. Which leads me to my second question. What was Montessori's reaction to discovering this educational method? What was her reaction to seeing a child experiencing conditions of real life? Well, she says it herself. She said she was surprised. Let's go back. Right here in red, it says surprising. They were surprised. This isn't what she expected. Maria Montessori started out just like the rest of us. She began traditionally with toys and teacher-led lessons. She used adult-sized furniture because that's all there was back then. When she made that change to the environment, what she observed surprised her. And it continued to surprise her as she saw this phenomenon take place with all children all over the world. That if we change our environment in this way, children behave differently. This condition of real life that the child experiences in the classroom had a remarkable effect on how the children behaved. It had a remarkable effect on their interest, on their concentration, and there seemed to be no limit of what they could learn. On pages 153 to 154, Maria Montessori talks about the method of Montessori. And she said, no educational method in the accepted sense had caused these happenings. On the contrary, it was they, the children, as they progressively unfolded, that became our guide and taught us how to treat the children. All began with our efforts to give satisfactory conditions of life, wherein the children should find no obstacles to their development, and in leaving them free to choose the various means of activity that we had provided. And on page 154, she said, hence it was true to say that what we had made was a discovery in infant psychology. In fact, Peary, the explorer, who was then just back from the North Pole expedition, called our work the discovery of the human soul. He thought this would give a better idea of its nature than to call it a method of education. And on page 154, she says, from the very beginning, there were two groups of facts which stood out clearly. One was that the child's mind can acquire culture at a much earlier age than is generally supposed. But his way of taking in knowledge is by certain kinds of activity which involve movement. Only by action can the child learn at his age. He has to do something which develops his unfolding self. Now that we know how great his receptivity is between 3 and 6, there can no longer be any doubt of this. The second group of facts relate to character formation, but I shall deal with these in a later chapter. So here's a couple more questions and an opportunity for you to reflect. My first question is, how does the discovery of the child's ability to acquire knowledge and information earlier in life, especially during the ages of 0 to 6, affect modern day education? Do you think there is a culture war going on for the young child's mind? There's a trend to begin teaching children certain subjects at a younger age. Some people label this as modern education and others call this indoctrination. How do you as a teacher or a parent approach this type of conflict? And lastly, who gets to decide what a young child learns? Schools, parents, government? What should we be providing in a 3 to 6-year-old environment? Especially considering that Montessori proved that a child's mind is so absorbent during this age. So I think this is a good place to stop for today. We are simply dipping our toe into the water in this video and building our framework for what comes next. So as we go forward with this chapter, keep in mind these main points from today. The first point is that children learn best through using their hands and through having real-world experiences. The second point is that the Montessori educational method aims to, 1, provide satisfactory conditions of life, place no obstacles to development in the child's path, support choice and freedom for the child to explore, and allow for the discovery of the human soul. And the last point that I want you to keep in mind is that Montessori concluded that there are 2 facts from her research. One is receptivity. Children can learn earlier than originally thought. but this knowledge is acquired through movement and experience. The second thing is character formation, which she said she will address in a later chapter. So that's it. That's all I have for today. The next video on chapter 17 will be about imagination, and I am looking forward to that video. That's going to be an extremely fun topic. So I hope you like what we've done today and that you are also excited for the next part of this chapter. And if you appreciate what I'm doing here, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.